Two tunnels sit in mile-long darkness beneath Pennsylvania's Appalachian ridgeline. No train ever passed through them. They were blasted through rock in the 1880s by laborers earning $1.25 a day, caught in a war between Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Frick, and Morgan. 9 workers died in dynamite explosions that summer. Weeks later, a deal struck on a $250,000 yacht killed the project overnight. This 13-mile corridor of abandoned turnpike has been left behind 3 times across 140 years. The story of who built these tunnels, who died inside, and who walked away starts in the Gilded Age. William H. Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, and J.P. Morgan, 4 titans whose fortunes and rivalries carved a new path through the Appalachian Mountains. By 1883, their syndicate had assembled $30 million, enough to buy steel, dynamite, and the labor of thousands. Payroll ledgers from the era show a laborer's daily wage at $1.25 for a 10-hour shift, barely enough to survive in the mountain camps. For most, necessity outweighed choice. The workforce was a patchwork of backgrounds and languages. Italians, recruited from Abruzzo and Campania, made up over half the crews. Hungarian stonecutters, seasoned by years in European quarries, joined them in the tunnels. African-American laborers, many formerly enslaved or sons of freed men, took on the most dangerous jobs, setting dynamite, bracing unstable rock, and clearing debris. Irish, Welsh, and native-born Pennsylvanians filled out the ranks. Census records and payroll fragments from 1884 reveal camps at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill, where Italian, Hungarian, and English mixed. But work assignments followed a strict order. Italians lined tunnels with brick. Hungarians cut stone. African-American crews handled explosives. Irish and native-born foremen enforced the pace, their authority a distant echo of the financiers' power. Camp life was relentless. At Rays Hill, rough timber and canvas shelters clung to the ridge, battered by wind and falling rock. Sidling Hill's camp near a stream offered plank-floored bunkhouses and a communal mess hall, but little else. Meals, bread and coffee, cost 30 cents a day, deducted from wages at the company commissary. Sanitation was minimal. The 1884 coroner's inquest for Sidling Hill mentions a single trench latrine behind the kitchen. Disease, especially dysentery, spread quickly. Mortality from illness and accident averaged 4% per year, a figure that would rise with the pace of blasting. Contracts, drafted in English with Italian or Hungarian subclauses, spelled out the terms: hazardous work, long hours, and $1.25 per day. Many signed with only a foreman as witness. Letters home told of darkness, damp, and the constant smell of mortar. Samuel Williams, an African-American dynamite specialist, faced daily risk for a wage that barely covered food and shelter. The financiers rarely set foot in the camps. Their focus stayed on ledgers and boardrooms, far from the noise and exhaustion of the tunnels. Yet it was the labor of men from southern Italy, Hungary, Maryland, and beyond that pushed the line forward. Temporary towns rose and fell with the demands of the payroll. In these hollows, ambition and fatigue collided, and the mountain watched, unmoved, as the work pressed on toward the next, more dangerous phase. On July 6, 1885, the Appalachian air above Sidling Hill was split by a blast that came too soon. 3 men died in the collapse: John McMullen, known as Jack, an Irish foreman; Antonio Russo, an Italian laborer; and William Harris, known as Billy, an African-American brakeman. Their names appeared in the Altoona Tribune the next morning, alongside a brief account of the explosion. 16 days later, on July 22nd, another detonation at the Rays Hill portal brought down loose rock and timber. George Kovac, a Hungarian stonecutter, and Samuel Carter, known as Sam, an African-American blaster, were killed instantly. The toll reached 9 dead by the time the last bodies were counted: 2 more Italians, another Irishman, and 2 unnamed men, their identities lost in the confusion of payroll lists and shifting crews. The official casualty lists, preserved on brittle newsprint, record the names but not the stories. They do not tell what brought these men to Bedford and Fulton counties, why they risked the tunnels, or how families in Pittsburgh or Szeged or Maryland would learn of the deaths only by letter. The July explosions stopped work across the mountain. Pennsylvania's State Mining Inspectorate arrived on site, notebooks in hand, but the investigation was brief. Tunnel walls, once echoing with the sound of hammer and drill, fell silent. The cost of delay, 6 months and $2 million, was more than the financiers had patience to bear. Labor unions in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh called for hazard pay and better safety, but their petitions went unanswered. The pace of Gilded Age ambition did not slow for loss or grief. Far from the tunnels, in New York, a different kind of negotiation was underway. J.P. Morgan, banker and broker, met with William H. Vanderbilt aboard a private yacht, a vessel valued at $250,000, transferred as collateral in a deal that would never appear in public ledgers. The arrangement was simple and devastating. Morgan would guarantee the Pennsylvania Railroad's bond issue for a new bridge, in exchange for Vanderbilt pulling his capital from the South Pennsylvania Railroad. The yacht, a symbol of luxury and power, changed hands quietly. The workforce in Bedford and Fulton counties never heard the terms. They only saw the sudden stop. Payrolls cut, camps emptied, equipment left to rust in the mountain rain. By late summer 1885, the tunnels at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill were abandoned. Shanties emptied, tools scattered, and the last pay envelopes were handed out with no promise of return. The right-of-way, 60% graded, 9 tunnels half-bored, was left to the elements. Legal limbo followed, bondholders fighting in court, and the Pennsylvania Railroad was blocked from taking over. For decades, the mountain kept its silence. The only traces of the men who died were names in a ledger, a coroner's report, and the hollowed stone that still cuts through the ridgeline. In Pennsylvania's mountains, the line between ambition and ruin was measured in miles of unfinished tunnel and the memory of 9 men lost to dynamite and haste. Court records from Harrisburg, dated 1886, tell the next chapter in the story of the South Pennsylvania Railroad. After the sudden halt of construction, the unfinished grade, 60% completed, 9 tunnels half-bored through the Appalachian Mountains, became the subject of a legal standoff. Bondholders, many from New York and Philadelphia, refused to surrender their claims. They filed an injunction in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, arguing that the right-of-way could not be transferred or repurposed without their approval. The case, South Pennsylvania Railroad Company versus Pennsylvania Railroad Company, reached a decision in late 1886. The court ruled that the corporate charter was non-transferable and that the bondholder block, not the Pennsylvania Railroad, controlled the fate of the corridor. For the next 55 years, the mountain grade remained in limbo. The tunnels at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill, carved at enormous cost in Bedford and Fulton counties, stood unused. Deed restrictions and unresolved claims kept the corridor locked away from both railroad and public use. Timber thieves and occasional hunters slipped through the portals, but no trains ever ran. Newspaper reports from the early 20th century described the tunnels as silent monuments to a lost era of Gilded Age ambition. The portals, ringed with weeds and drifting snow, became local landmarks, known to children as places of dare and to farmers as a source of unease. In the background, the legal machinery ground on. The trust fund created by the 1891 settlement held $3.2 million in assets, but the land itself could not be sold or developed. State highway inspectors visited the site in 1912 and again in 1919, each time noting the structural soundness of the portals but warning of water infiltration and growing decay. Still, no action followed. The unfinished grade cut a scar through the ridges of Pennsylvania, but its future was frozen by the courts. The legal deadlock shaped the fate of the corridor. By the 1930s, as the Great Depression pushed state planners to seek new infrastructure projects, the dormant grade offered a rare opportunity. The old South Pennsylvania Railroad right-of-way, held in legal trust for 5 decades, became available for public purchase only because the original injunctions had preserved its integrity. The tunnels at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill, once symbols of failed ambition, were now poised to become the backbone of a new kind of highway. In this way, the courts, acting as gatekeepers, kept the line intact long enough for it to be reborn as the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The legacy of those legal battles is still etched into the land, visible in the way the old grade runs straight and silent through Bedford and Fulton counties, waiting for a second life. In 1938, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission paid $2.5 million for the dormant South Pennsylvania Railroad corridor, a line that once cut through the Appalachian Mountains but had long since faded into overgrown silence. Its abandoned tunnels at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill became the focus of a bold public project. Inspections revealed water stains, frost cracks, and loose stone, yet the limestone arches still held strong. Engineers saw a rare opportunity by widening the old bores to 28 feet, lining them with concrete, and laying 38-foot decks. They could transform relics of failed ambition into the backbone of a modern highway. Using these tunnels shaved years off construction and saved Pennsylvania an estimated $5 million in excavation costs. Work began that fall. Asphalt replaced cinders, and fans and lights brought air and visibility to the mountain's core. By September 1940, crews, many descended from the original tunnel workers, were painting stripes and testing toll booths. On October 1, 1940, the Pennsylvania Turnpike opened. The highway stretched 160 miles from Irwin to Carlisle, but it was the 13-mile segment through Bedford and Fulton counties, with its twin tunnels, that drew the nation's gaze. Newspapers called it America's first superhighway. Drivers came from Chicago and New York to pay the 25-cent toll and experience the new passage through the mountains. For two aging laborers, the opening was bittersweet. One, an Italian mason in his 70s, the other, an African-American former blaster, stood at the Rays Hill portal, hands on the stone they had shaped decades before. Their work, once left to decay, now supported the hopes of a state looking to the future. World War II changed everything. In February 1942, the United States Army Corps of Engineers stationed 30 soldiers at each tunnel portal. Guard rosters from the Turnpike Commission detailed daily patrols, blackout lighting, and anti-sabotage checks. The highway became a vital military artery, moving troops and supplies east. For 3 years, the tunnels were watched day and night, their security as critical as any bridge or rail line. The Turnpike's success was instant. Within 5 years, traffic doubled, and the two-lane tunnels struggled to keep up. Reports from 1946 warned of congestion and carbon monoxide on busy weekends. Yet, for a brief time, the corridor stood as proof of what public engineering could achieve, turning forgotten stone into a symbol of recovery. In 1961, a Pennsylvania Department of Transportation engineering report warned that the tunnels at Rays Hill and Sidling Hill were no longer suited to the rising tide of vehicles crossing the Appalachian Mountains. Designed for a quieter era, these bores now funneled double their intended traffic, creating bottlenecks and raising the risk of carbon monoxide buildup. The numbers were stark. Average daily counts had soared past 22,000 vehicles, far beyond the safe limits, for two narrow lanes carved through limestone and concrete. Engineers weighed the options, widening the tunnels or building a new road. The state chose the latter. By November 1968, the new bypass opened, sweeping traffic north of the old corridor and leaving 13 miles of turnpike in Bedford and Fulton counties to fall silent. Cove Valley Plaza, once a busy stop for travelers near the Rays Hill portal, was demolished within months. Local business owners in Bedford and Fulton counties watched as their customer base evaporated almost overnight. County revenue records from the early 1970s show a sharp drop in fuel and sales tax receipts, echoing the loss of jobs tied to the plaza and roadside commerce. The economic sting was immediate and enduring. Breezewood, just to the west, became an unlikely survivor. The design of the interchange between Interstate 70 and Interstate 76 forced every driver to exit onto surface streets, turning Breezewood into a captive market for gas, food, and motels. While much of the original corridor faded into obscurity, Breezewood's service economy thrived, its neon signs and parking lots standing in contrast to the abandoned tunnels just beyond the ridge. The bypass brought relief to drivers, but for Bedford and Fulton counties, it left a void, one measured in empty plazas, lost payrolls, and the quiet decay of a once pioneering highway. A film crew arrived at the mouth of Rays Hill Tunnel in 2008, drawn by the bleak symmetry of concrete and rust. Their cameras traced the cracked pavement and graffiti-tagged walls, capturing a silence that once thundered with engines. Production notes from that shoot described the tunnels as both a hazard and a stage. Minimal lighting, temporary scaffolding, and constant checks for falling debris were required. The same year, the Bedford and Fulton County line became a magnet for preservationists. In 2001, the Commonwealth transferred the abandoned corridor to the Southern Alleghenies Conservancy, a small nonprofit built on the promise of environmental stewardship and local memory. 17 years later, stewardship passed to the Bedford-Fulton Joint Recreation Authority, a coalition of county officials and local advocates determined to reclaim the route. Between 2023 and 2025, the state awarded $800,000 in grants for restoration. The funds paid for new drainage, rock netting, and interpretive kiosks that recount the South Pennsylvania Railroad's collapse, the immigrant labor camps, and the World War II guard posts. At the former Cove Valley Plaza, a cracked parking lot was cleared for trailhead use, a new beginning atop old ruin. Pennsylvania's pattern of abandonment is not unique to the Turnpike. The Centralia mine fire, burning since 1962, left a ghost town just 70 miles to the north. Bridge deficiency reports list thousands of spans across the state in fair or poor condition. Each site tells a parallel story: grand designs, sudden neglect, and the slow work of local hands trying to restore what was left behind. In Bedford and Fulton counties, the old Turnpike is both a warning and an invitation, a place where the cycle of ambition and abandonment meets the quiet persistence of community revival. Inside the tunnels of Bedford and Fulton counties, the air is cool and unmoving. Concrete arches marked by decades of freeze and thaw still stand, worn but holding. In 2024, PennDOT engineers gave both Rays Hill and Sidling Hill a fair rating, safe enough for hikers and cyclists, but no longer for trucks or cars. The old Turnpike lingers between maintenance and neglect, its structure enduring but slowly fading. Sidling Hill Tunnel runs for more than a mile, 6,782 feet from end to end. At its center, darkness is absolute. There is no sunlight, only the sound of water dripping and footsteps echoing off cracked pavement. The world shrinks to breath and the faint brush of wind against concrete. This stretch of mile-long darkness is unmatched in Pennsylvania, a place where the built world has yielded to silence. Life remains. Each winter, about 2,500 big brown bats roost in the high vaults, protected under state law. Their colony is tracked by acoustic sensors and annual surveys. Lichen creeps along the walls, nourished by mineral seepage. On weekends, around 1,200 people walk or cycle the abandoned grade each month, drawn by isolation and the challenge of the darkness. Emergency call boxes and portal lights offer some security, but inside the experience is raw. The tunnels endure, their future unresolved. In Bedford and Fulton counties, 13 miles of concrete and limestone still divide ambition from abandonment. The cost was $1.25 a day, 9 dead, and 2 tunnels never finished. It remains carved in the Appalachian Mountains. Today, the Pike 2-Bike corridor is both a memorial and an opportunity. Here, Pennsylvania's wealth and poverty, past and present, are fused in rust and silence. Some scars never heal, they become part of the landscape. Share your thoughts below.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button in the middle for more corporate negligence, environmental health disasters, and abandonment stories from across America and beyond.